It's my privilege to introduce Rebecca Angove, who is leading this next panel session, which we hope to be very engaging. Yesterday was a great start. The bar was set high, and today will only get better. And I will also make an important plug at the end of today. Please do fill out the evaluation using the link that will pop up as you close out. We really do take people's feedback and input and insights very seriously in terms of how we shape up these events for the future. I will turn to Rebecca Angove, my colleague on the screen, and her illustrious panel, which you will describe, Rebecca. So please take it away, and thanks for a great day ahead.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, it does get confusing. Too many Rebeccas, although can there ever be too many Rebeccas? So I am joined with my great colleagues, Gwen Darien, who is the EVP of Patient Advocacy and Engagement at the National Patient Advocate Foundation, as well as Kate Gallagher, who is the VP of Health Services Research at Patient Advocate Foundation. And together with myself, we are going to have a bit of a roundtable discussion about patient engagement and research and projects, and how both PAF and NPAF have included and partnered with patients to make sure that the work we do is informed by and really driven by, and at many times co-created by patients and the patient experience. There will be time to ask some questions at the end, but if you have questions while we're chatting, please put them in the chat, and we will absolutely get to as many as we can. But Gwen, I thought we could start with you, and if you could just talk a little bit about the importance of patient and caregivers and influencing and informing the work that NPAF does. You know, what programs are they involved in, and how are they being involved?
I thought the host was unmuting all of us. Kate, we all have to unmute. Anyway, thank you, Rebecca. Kate, great to see you, and great to be on a panel together to talk about patient research that really centers patients and really focuses on multi-stakeholder partnerships. So before we just kind of dive into some of the specific projects, I just want to step back a minute and talk about why this has been the foundation of patient advocacy for so many years, which was to put patients in the center, patients, families, communities in the center of research, because ultimately, of course, patients, families, and communities are the ones who receive care, are the ones who decide, as we talked about yesterday, whose values and whose goals should inform the care that they receive and the care that they deserve. So in order to make sure that through research and through engagement, that we achieve goals and outcomes that are important to patients and families, we have to ensure that their voices are there from the very, very beginning. And so I think that, you know, as I think about my kind of 25-year advocacy journey, it's pretty hard. It's amazing to believe it's been 25 years now. I think about, I have worked in different kinds of research advocacy, from clinical research advocacy to healthcare system research advocacy, to also as well as psychosocial research advocacy. And in all of those, the best research is the research that's done that puts every stakeholder and includes the expertise of every stakeholder in that research. And so today I'll talk a little bit about one project that we've been working on at NPAF, which is a project that we're doing in collaboration with my friend and colleague, Sandy Suffian at the University of Illinois, Chicago Medical School, which is looking at how we engage patients virtually in the CF community, which Sandy is a part of, and the breast cancer community, which I'm a part of, to set up research questions on women's health and sexual and reproductive health. And in that research project, we're actually setting up the questions and then convening the lab that will develop the research protocols and develop them further into a research plan and a research program.
So Gwen, can you maybe give us a few examples of exactly how patients are being involved in informing it, just so some members of our audience who haven't been involved in projects give kind of a feel of what that really looks like?
Absolutely. So this project, I mean, this project has it's sort of, what I love about it is it turns the general process of research on its head. It sort of flips it. So the first group that we convened we call it the breast cancer cohort team. And they have developed and they've convened meetings of women with breast cancer, women who are survivors of breast cancer, to look at to develop and look at different aspects of the impact of breast cancer on women's health, particularly sexual and reproductive health. And as many of us know who've had breast cancer and have had loved ones who've had breast cancer, that is a huge impact for women with breast cancer. Is what happens on women's health. Everything from families to body image to sexuality to things that we don't necessarily want to talk about outside of our groups of people with like experience. So what we've done is that we start with meetings that we've convened. We've now done 6 of them, that we bring together patients and we bring together a topic. And the women with breast cancer they develop the research questions together among themselves in a safe space. And then we vote on what questions are the most important questions to that entire group. And those questions will then be put forward to a lab that we're calling the Letter Lab, which is the lab to engage transdisciplinary research. And that lab will take what women who with breast cancer and survivors have identified as the things that are the most important to them in terms of outcomes, and turn those into research questions and develop research protocols that we can look for funding. So all of the research and all of the questions are derived from women's experiences and things that are important for women. So I'll just say, from a personal experience, oftentimes people make decisions on, let's say, breast conserving surgery based on cosmetics. They don't necessarily make it based on what women are going to need, what it changes in their quality of life, how they are, what happens after that surgery. So when I was making a decision about surgery for my breast cancer, my surgeon recommended I have a bilateral mastectomy because of cosmetic issues, because of what would happen if I had a recurrence. I said, well, what's my chance of recurrence? Well, 2%. Well, then why would I, so those kinds of questions, because I'm an advocate, was able to reframe the questions in ways that were important to me, rather than just looking at it from the way that might have been important to somebody who didn't have breast cancer. What's the difference between recovering from surgery that is 14 hours as opposed to 8 hours? There are just so many issues that people who have gone through this really understand what the impact of their choices are. So our role in this project and our role in patient-centered outcomes research, I think, is to ensure that people make decisions based on evidence that is important to them and based on their goals and their values, so that they don't just make a decision based on something so that they take in the whole person, they take in their whole lives. They don't think of it from one specific frame or another. We all live our lives. We do not live linear lives. There are multiple paths that intersect, and there are clinical reasons, there are family reasons, there are quality of life reasons, there are work reasons that we make all of these decisions. So that's what we're trying to do, is look at it from perspective of a person rather than the perspective of what might be a clinical research question.
Yeah, those are such great
recording in progress.
Thanks so much for sharing, Gwen. I want to pull back a little bit, because what I love about having both Kate and Gwen on this panel is that Kate is our PAF resident epidemiologist, and she works with big data. So less one-on-one in advocacy work like Gwen does. So Kate, you're working with, and I say big data, it's not huge, but we at PAF serve, 120,000 patients a year. We collect a lot of information and we hear a lot of things from our patients. And we also do some survey work. And I was wondering how you, as both an epidemiologist, you lead our data team, but you're also really involved in initiatives in collecting the patient voice and making sure that voice and perspective informs PAF, our work, and also the wider healthcare ecosystem. Can you kind of just talk a little bit about that and the importance of knowing the challenges and needs that patients have, maybe on that larger scale, a way that you work with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the most interesting things about, I think, the data that we have and that we collect at PAF is that it does make this really nice circle and cycle. So I get to see a lot of our programmatic data, which is the data that it's predominantly collected through our case management and our navigation programs, our high touch programs. Often I get to see some of it at an aggregate level. I get to see some of it at the individual level. And we tease out concepts from what the case managers tell us they hear from patients, what we see is trending in this data. And this is how we develop a lot of our survey initiatives. Often we will pull in our colleagues, over at NPAF, or we'll reach out to others in different departments at PAF to design some of these different survey tools. But once they're launched, they allow us to gather an additional layer of information that can be paired with what we see programmatically. And it allows us to answer questions as well as to collect thematic data. And Rebecca, this is something that you have a tendency to handle a little bit more than I do, but a lot of those open-ended questions, it's always really interesting to see how diverse, but then also how homogeneous those responses can sometimes be. And again, it's data that drives questions, that drives data, that drives questions.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you talk about the themes that emerge in some of those research projects, because it leads into some of the things that Gwen's working on, right? So we'll, for example, send out an email, and you're right, the things that everybody is saying is really interesting, right? Because there's something there. If everybody's saying the same thing or having a similar experience, that there's usually something there. But then when you look at the anomalies, right, or the outliers, or the one-offs, usually that's also kind of this nugget of something unique is happening, and how can we make sure that doesn't become a trend if it's a challenge, or how can we figure out how or why this experience matters in the bigger picture. So you're right, kind of those bigger data projects absolutely feeds into those kind of smaller exploratory projects, and vice versa. It's great seeing how kind of the cycle, right? The research cycle. I know that patient engagement and research is something that is becoming more and more widespread. And, for our audience, I just want to share that when we talk about research, we're really talking about research that spans, kind of the entire healthcare continuum. So it's not just clinical research, although there is patient engagement involved in clinical trials and FDA funded work, and a lot of, industry work, what you think of a lot when you say research. But research is also small scale studies into how to translate findings into the clinical world. It is, lifestyle, psychosocial. So, that experience that patients have with the disease and their condition that often happens, in academic settings. So there's a lot of work. Kind of the research, the term research really spans everything that is being collected and explored about patients and healthcare. I mean, Kate, the work you do is research, right? With your survey work and kind of exploring the data. And I think there's definitely a movement to engage patients more, especially in the early phases of this work. It's definitely one of my messages and one of my soapboxes whenever I get a chance to talk. I was wondering if you both maybe individually could talk a little bit about what opportunities you see, both at PAF and some of the projects that you're involved in, Kate, and at NPAF, Gwen, that you're involved with, to really increase patient and caregiver involvement in the research projects you're working on or see as upcoming.
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca, I think with a lot of this survey work, I have a concept or an idea of what I see in data. And, we do have a lot of patients who they're not one-offs. They have a tendency to repetitively be involved with PAF for whatever sort of healthcare information, education, navigation that they're seeking. And, I think this idea of building a network of activated patients who can contribute to projects that we're thinking about doing is really exciting. I know that's something that you have been in the process of building out in a couple of different ways. And I believe also we'll be doing a focus group later on today. But to me, that's one of the most exciting things and things that I think are needed. I think having kind of like these organized and activated, and again, on the end side, I think that Gwen's team does a really great job of that activating, especially through their volunteer network, and also dissemination. I think that that's something that they're really, really, really good at doing.
Gwen, you're on mute.
We were being muted on, and I thought we were being muted and unmuted automatically. You would think, I say this after 18 months of this, I would know how to do this, but no. So in the next session, Chris Wilson and I will describe one of the projects that we've done sort of very much in depth around conversations about cost of care and measurements about cost of care. But what I'll say in this session is that so many things that we do and all of the initiatives that we look at are really that we undertake are really informed by the experiences of the patients that PAF serves. And those patients are primarily underinsured. They're from traditionally marginalized communities. They're patients with serious and chronic illnesses. They're people who do not have access to equitable and affordable healthcare. So everything that we do, both internally and externally, is really very much driven by the values of the organization, which is that everyone deserves access to equitable, affordable, and quality care. And the other thing that we do that is very much part of the value of the whole organization is that healthcare is not just clinical care. Healthcare is care of the whole person. Costs of care are not just cost of your doctor's visits or clinical care. It's also childcare costs, it's opportunity costs, it's cost of daily living, it's the food you need, how many people take medication that they need to take with food. So much of what we do is reliant on good nutrition. And then the other thing that we do is we also have focused a lot on the case manager experience and sort of what we're learning from the case managers and aggregating that in terms of our patients. So one example that actually both Rebecca and Kate worked on as a project we did with friend and colleague Vince Bonham at the NIH. about equitable access to genomic and personalized medicine. And in that, some of the things that we learned from that project, because we interviewed case managers rather than patients, were things that we've carried through. So one of the things we learned was that the extent to which our case managers help patients learn how to be self-advocates, because the self-advocacy skills that they build through case management really are not just about that particular moment, but they are about building skills for as they're interacting with the care system. I won't just say the healthcare system. The other thing that we learned was the extent to which case managers talk about clinical trials as an option for receiving certain kinds of care. Now, they don't match people with trials, they don't sell or promote clinical trials, but they talk about that as an option. One of the other things we've learned is that was mentioned a little bit yesterday is and Kate and Rebecca mentioned it earlier today, is the notion of shared decision-making and how patients want to and families want to be involved in care. And there definitely is a continuum, but if you look at the continuum, there's a very small percentage on one end who wants to make all the decisions, a very small percentage on another end that wants their healthcare provider to make the decision, but the majority of people are in the middle where they want to make informed decisions and they want to participate in the shared decision-making process. And the only way that will be, the only way that we will do that and we will have the outcomes satisfying to patients is if the decisions are made based on the outcomes that patients care about and that are important to patients. So that's one of the reasons why patient-centered outcomes research is such a critical way and methodology of doing research.
You know, Gwen, I'm so glad you bring up those points. I know one thing that we're trying to do as we were building out our patient network, the work that we're doing through the Institute to really bring in future opportunities to expand and formalize the patient role, not only in the research and the work of PAF, but also with our partners. I think it's so important that we always try to do better and understand what we're not seeing, what we're not asking, our gaps, because only patients know their experience, only patients know what we're missing. And I think, as Kate was talking, I think expanding, we do a great job, I think, at PAF and NPAF of including patients, but we can always do better. And I'm even thinking, it would be great as we continue to involve more and more patients and caregivers in our work to really explore those, the gaps. What aren't we asking? What are we missing? Because so often we ask about the things that are top of mind that our case managers are talking about, our navigators are talking about, or our colleagues are talking about, or the researchers are talking about. And, and our patients give us great feedback on that. But we don't do enough pausing to ask, what are we missing, right? What are we being asked about? And that's a place we could do more.
Well, and I think the corollary to that, as we're, one of the things that we all have been working on very much over, I think, particularly the past year, I've been working on principles of equity and inclusion in PCOR research, is who's not at the table, who built the table. So it's not just what we're not asking patients, but it's also who isn't at the table and how we can identify those, that we have to look around the table. We don't have to just listen to and make sure that we are very intentional in creating this ethos of diversity.
So that is a good call to action. When we email you or reach out and tell you we need your voice, we really do, because we need everybody around the table. So that's my plug for the day. I want to keep us a few minutes for Q&A. I promised the audience they would have time for questions. So Mary, can you jump in with what's going on in the chat?
Yes, of course. One of the questions that we received is, in your experience, how do researchers create an environment where patients and caregivers feel valued and safe?
I have lots of thoughts, but who wants to take that one?
I think that, well, I'll just start because I also can see, there's another comment that came in, which is also similar to this. So one of the ways to really start out is to start out with a really clear idea of what the roles and responsibilities are, and with a clear leveling of respect for everybody across the table. So one of the things that I will say makes me crazy, and has for my 25 years as an advocate, is that if we're around the table and there is a doctor at the table, they will call them Dr. So-and-so. If there's a patient, they'll call me Gwen. So there isn't that same equivalent respect given to people who are around the table. And that's just a signifier of respect. But everybody's role has to be valued, and there has to be open discussion around those values. And there has to be a sense from the beginning of what everybody's roles and responsibilities are going to be, what their compensation is going to be, if it's a funded study, how much time people will be expected to spend, and how decision making is done. So not just how we're going to listen to you, but how we're going to create decisions and how we're going to feed that back to you and create a real learning research enterprise, as opposed to just a one directional research enterprise.
Yeah, and I think researchers are getting better at this. There's more training out there, and we have to realize that for a lot of researchers, this is a new way to do the work. And I've seen some real real success where patients and caregivers kind of learn what their role could or should be. You know, they do a lot of that homework and legwork, and then essentially make, I don't want to say demands, but, kind of set the expectation to the team that this is how you engage patients. This is how you engage me. And really patients and caregivers, once they learn themselves, can really help teach those research teams. And there's lots of online resources, for training, and there's more resources out there. But sometimes you have to teach up.
Yeah, but also I think there's the other thing that we can't forget, which is that there's a mutual compact. So if you're a patient and you're an advocate and you agree to be part of a project, you also have responsibility and accountability to the project. So it's everybody who's on the team has accountability to the other members of the team.
Thank you. And another question that we received in the chat, what are some tips for patients and caregivers serving in an advisory capacity that have not yet taken part in the research process?
So I'm going to use this as a plug for some of the work the Institute is doing. There's a lot of really great resources that can help ready you, both trainings and just tip sheets. And I'm actually involved in a project with Mary and Kate, sending out messages to patients, helping kind of ready them to be part of research teams and advisory groups. So my best advice, without going through a formal training or having kind of a peer coach, if you know a patient that's done it before, is always don't be afraid to speak up and really have the confidence that you're there for a reason. Your expertise matters, and they don't know what you know, and they need you there. Gwen, Kate, do y'all have, or even Mary, you're on that project too. Do you guys have any thoughts?
I would say physicians need to, or researchers need to understand that nothing will ever replace the lived experience. You can have a concept of how something should go, but you can never replace what that patient contributed actually having gone through that experience. So
I would certainly echo all of those sentiments. I think that also just making sure that it's clear at the beginning when patients and caregivers enter these spaces and these projects, that it is articulated that their experience is expertise. And that's the best training that could ever be given on this type of research project. So we have two more questions. one is super interesting. This is a similar one that we received yesterday. How would you let patients and caregivers know the results of research you do, and why is that important?
So I'll jump on that one. The sharing, I think, of results back to contributors is at times one of the biggest challenges. One of the things that we've started doing, at least at PAF, is for all of the survey work, Rebecca and I, and usually a few others, we go through all of the results that we've generated, and we actually create infographics and a 1 to 2 page kind of synopsis, basically reiterating to the patient who's taken the time to participate in our surveys, because at times they can be lengthy, thanking them and actually showing them, in aggregate, this is what your voice contributed to. So that's something that we've been working on. I think researchers who are doing work in communities, in populations, need to be really cognizant of their platforms for dissemination that are not peer-reviewed journals. And those are just as important, if not more important.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, Gwen, did you?
Yeah, I think that there's, and this is something that researchers and advocates have been talking about for a long time. There really is a moral compact that everybody makes when they engage in research, whether it's clinical research or health services research or psychosocial research. And so one of the parts of the moral compact of researchers is that they're not just going into communities and taking from communities and leaving, that they actually need to go, and communities our partner communities, they ask all the time, don't just come in and leave. Don't just come in and take what you need and leave. So as advocates, as researchers, as part of this enterprise, we really need to fulfill our part of this moral compact. And however it's delivered back, one of the ways to figure that out is to ask people how they want the results and what they want from results. But it is one of our responsibilities. So and Chris and I will talk more about this in our upcoming session, but that was one of the kind of founding values of what we did for this project that we're going to talk about. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that we have a really very rich advocacy training program, patient advocacy training program at NPAF, and it is about multiple different. It's a sequential program, and it's about many different kinds of advocacy, backgrounds in advocacy, and it is for people who want to really dig deeper into what it means to be a patient advocate and all the different kinds of patient advocacy that are out there. So that is on the NPAF website. And so I encourage everybody who's interested in learning more about all different kinds of advocacy, including patient-centered outcomes, research advocacy, to really go into that and explore that program.
Thank you so much. And there is one more question we have left, but before that, we did receive a comment earlier about time commitment surrounding joining projects. So this, I think, would be a fairly quick one to answer. How is that sort of articulated when individuals join research projects?
Yeah, Mary, that's a really, good question and comments. Very quickly, it really depends on the project, but those expectations should be shared with you as a patient or caregiver upfront. It's okay to ask if they're not shared. And I've been on projects where the time commitment is as little as 10 minutes because they just need a group of patients to do a survey to prioritize research topics, or it could be as intensive as a couple hours or more a week. So it really is dependent on the project, but also researchers are fairly flexible and will work with you. So there can be some negotiation. And oftentimes there's a memo of understanding or some sort of contract-like agreement between researchers and patients. And so that's all spelled out upfront, and both people should abide by, what's agreed upon.
Mhm. And I'll just add one more thing from the patient advocacy perspective, and somebody who's been asked to be in that on that side. I think that it's a sign of respect for the patient advocates and caregivers that you're bringing in, that you actually outline what their duties and responsibilities are, and think about the kind of time commitment there's going to be, because and we try in everything that we do at PAF and NPAF to be very clear about what the expectations are, how much time it's going to take, the minimum, the maximum, and really lay it out before people say yes, before people commit. And that, it's sort of like when your mother told you when you were younger, don't be late. When you're going out to meet somebody for dinner, don't be late, because you're not respecting them and you're not respecting their time. Same thing with research. Don't respect people's time, respect people's expertise. Think about what is, think about who you're asking to be at the table, and what kind of table manners we all want to have at that table.
Thank you so much. I know we're coming really close to time. So this is our final one. So in a virtual world, how would a sample collaboration between client and caregiver be if the care involves or is based on client needs? What does it look like trying to fill that gap?
So I think I understand this question. It's, I think from an engagement perspective, and this is not, unfortunately, this isn't related to, say, caregiving directly, but from an engagement perspective, it has been challenging, because a lot of the work that we used to do in person, in real time, in real life, has been put on hold, and we've been doing these Zoom meetings. Which people love them or hate them. But that being said, there has been some success because more people, because of proximity, not needing to travel, there's been an opportunity to really engage a more diverse group of patients and caregivers by virtue of not needing to travel or take time away from the house or out of the house. So I think that's supported a lot more caregiver involvement in some of these projects. Gwen, Kate, do you have anything to add?
So I think there are multiple things to add. I mean, there, as we all have probably seen, lots of conversations about what's going to happen when we can gather together more, and what's going to happen when there are more options for receiving care or getting together. And I think there is, right now we have an opportunity to learn from what we've done over the past year and a half. Some of it has been incredibly successful. I will say, as Rebecca mentioned earlier, we have been able to bring people into our programs that we weren't able to bring into our programs before. We were able to bring in a colleague from Alaska who's Alaska Native, who I could never have flown in for a program. But at the same time, just the idea of healing touch has changed so much. And healing touch can also be the healing touch of being in a room together and being in a community together. But that notion doesn't really come across in terms of on the screen, but you can make communities. And that was one of the reasons why we were so excited about doing this project with Sandy Suffian at the University of Illinois, Chicago, because CF patients cannot gather in a room together because they risk cross-infection. And it is, so we wanted to see if that would work with breast cancer patients, if they would create the same kind of relationships and generate these same kind of ideas when they weren't in the same room together. And I think we've done a pretty good job, but we also see where the limitations are. So there are lots and lots of lessons to be learned. And there are also lessons to be learned from things that didn't work. And that's the other thing that I would encourage people to do. We always want to learn from what worked, but we should also not think of something not working as a failure. It is just a way of learning how to do something differently.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us this session. And thank you to our panelists and all the insightful questions that you all forwarded this session. Up next, we're going to begin our second session of the day called Co-Creating Programs with Community Partners and Associates.